121. Trial in Progress 1. Conan was at a loss for words. Ran and Xiaxi could speculate about things that hadn't even happened yet, and he doubted Sindora Company would be able to avoid the fallout. The parents, politicians, and tycoons whose children had been swept up in Noah's Ark's threats weren't the reasonable sort. If Sindora was implicated, their operations would be in jeopardy. Continuing to run the Cocoon game would be doubtful. This might be the last chance anyone ever had to play a full dive game. Focalers went on. Nouvellette, I don't know why they're so sure Marcel is the culprit, but I have solid evidence that the magician's movements during the performance were suspicious. She gestured to an aide who brought forward the evidence she had collected. The courtroom reacted in stunned silence. The so-called magician was a spy implanted in Fontaine by another nation, using his performances to gather intelligence. Focaller's proof also showed he hadn't been on stage during the crucial part of the show, so where had he been, and what had he been doing? Nouvellette turned to the magician. Tell us, where exactly did you go during your performance? Cornered, the magician confessed. He had taken the rare opportunity of performing at the Opera Epiclese to inspect the mechanism under the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal. While he was there, he heard a voice coming from the core. It hurts. How much longer? And thinking an intruder was present, aborted his inspection and returned to the stage. He had no idea what happened in the meantime. The next thing he knew, the accident on stage had occurred. The gallery buzzed. Conan winced. Of course, the magician had a hidden identity. After finding the assistant's notebook, he had been eager to question the man. Now he'd missed his chance. Haibara caught something in the magician's words. He said a voice came from the Oratrice's core. Remember what Xiaxi first heard at the Fountain of Lucine? Ayumi nodded. She said someone was saying, so long, so lonely, how much longer? Wait, the realization hit her. Mitsuhiko did too. That sounds exactly like what the Oratrice said. Could it be the same voice? Maybe, Moriboshi agreed, then added, but the fountain is where the Oceanids are. How could an Oceanid be in both the fountain and the Oratrice at the same time? Genta chimed in at once. Doesn't have to be an Oceanid. I heard the Oratrice was built by the Hydro Archon. Maybe it became self-aware and wants to wipe out humans. That could be Fontaine's crisis. Genta connected it to the Noah's Ark incident and let his imagination run. The rest of the room was silent, staring. Conan broke the tense moment. Ahem, we should focus on proving Marcel is the culprit, not the magician. Xiaxi redirected, easing the younger ones back to the missing girl's case. It made sense. They refocused on the trial. Despite Focaller's bombshell, Xiaxi's team used the assistant's notebook, testimony from the so-called lucky spectator damselette, Marcel's lab notes, and samples of the primordial seawater to show, despite his intoxication, that Marcel had motive and opportunity for the disappearances. Focalers kept trying to poke holes in their argument. When they claimed the water could dissolve Fontanians, the gallery erupted in disbelief. Come on, people dissolved by water? Is that even possible? Doesn't that echo the prophecy? Coincidence? A few sharp spectators hesitantly linked it to the prophecy. Most refused to accept that people could literally melt away. Only when Xiaxi produced Marcel's experiment logs and a victim list that matched the missing girls did the room fall silent. As mounting evidence closed every escape, Focalers found herself with no rebuttal. Nouvellette asked finally, Miss Farina, do you have any further objections to the charges against Marcel? Focalers faltered, eyes darting. Answer the question, Miss Farina, Nouvellette repeated, and the prosecution may not leave before the trial ends. Focalers spun, startled. How did you know I was about to walk out? Xiaxi's team stared. Genta whispered, the Hydro Archon flees when she loses. Kikukawa muttered, totally unsportsmanlike. Ayumi looked crushed. I thought gods were noble, mighty, and mysterious. Focalers doesn't fit any of those. Conan smiled slightly. Maybe she was never a god at all. Moriboshi glanced at Conan. Xiaxi did too, and the two exchanged a look. Mitsuhiko looked puzzled. Not a god? Everyone in Fontaine believes Focalers is the Hydro Archon. How could she be fake? Conan didn't answer aloud. You'll see soon enough. Nouvellette called out her thoughts with unerring accuracy. Farina, the Hydro Archon, felt cornered and could only admit defeat. Sigh. No objections. I admit I lost, all right, she said, then leaned in to whisper, "Honestly, give me some face. You didn't have to ask me at a time like this." With Farina's silence on record, Nuviet summarized the proceedings one last time and announced that the person finally identified in the missing girl's case was Marcel. Therefore, this case will now be submitted to the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal for a final verdict. The Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal below him pulsed a dazzling aqua blue. Conan's expression went blank for a moment. If the evidence was already so clear, why still consult the oracle? Mitsuhiko stroked his chin and, feigning solemnity, asked, "Do you think there's ever been a time the oracle's verdict differed from the Chief Justice's?" Shiashi patted Mitsuhiko on the head and answered in the same mock-serious tone, "Not in the 500 years Nuvilet's been Chief Justice, as far as I know." "Really?" Rand's eyes shone with surprised admiration. "In that case, Mr. Nuvilet is pretty amazing." Conan, watching Rand, muttered under his breath, "Whether that machine is accurate isn't even certain yet." The aqua blue light faded and a verdict appeared in Nuvilet's hand. He glanced at it, stood, and announced, "Hereby, according to the judgment of the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal, I declare the magician innocent, Marcel guilty." The children who had been following the case erupted in celebration, high-fiving and cheering. "Yes! Complete victory!" Farina watched them for a beat, shoulders sagging, then quickly recovered. She clapped and addressed the travelers with theatrical warmth. "Foreign travelers, I admire your efforts in solving this case. Celebrate to your heart's content. You bested the god of justice in a courtroom duel. Though I did not put forth my full force, your hard work moved me. This victory in the courtroom is yours." Turning to the crowd, she continued, "I wish to congratulate these foreign travelers for passing the trial of me, Hydro Archon Furina. They have proven their courage and wisdom. Therefore, I hereby declare that they have gained the friendship of the Hydro Archon Furina. In Fontaine, they are our honored guests." Thunderous applause rolled through the audience. The whispers of doubt about Furina's defeat evaporated, replaced by admiration. "So it was all a trial? I knew it. How could Lady Hydro Archon lose?" someone said. "Of course. Lady Hydro Archon sees things we can't even imagine. What a marvelous spectacle," another added. Genta, half-lidded, muttered, "Is she just bluffing?" "Seems like it," came the answer. Shiashi only allowed a slight twitch of her mouth. Noah's Ark had done a remarkable job recreating Furina's persona, so convincingly that it smoothed over the whole affair. For a moment, the courtroom felt like Furina's home turf again. Nuviet began instructing the guard to escort the relevant parties away and was preparing to depart when Conan called out, "Mr. Novilet, please wait. One more thing." Everyone paused. The audience that had been dispersing, Furina and her retinue. Nuviet looked at Conan. "Is there something else?" Conan spoke loud enough for all to hear. "While everyone's still here, we want to initiate a trial against a god. The subject of the trial is Hydro Archon Furina." Furina, about to leave, froze. "Are you joking? I am Focalors, the god of justice. To put justice itself on trial, it's absurd. I have many matters as the god of Fontaine to attend to. I won't indulge this. I'll be going." "Wait." Novilet stopped her. He, too, had been surprised by the traveler's demand, and his eyes narrowed. He thought back to their earlier exchanges about the prophecy and the former Hydro Archon Agaria, and realized what the travelers were trying to force out of her. He had planned to accept the accusation and pick another time for the trial, but seeing Furina trying to bow out again, he decided this was the moment to press for the truth, while accuser, judge, audience, and accused were all present. He said, "Where there is an accusation, there must be a trial." "Miss Furina, am I to understand your earlier words as a refusal to stand trial?" "Of course not," Furina protested. "I merely think this trial is an absurd drama, totally meaningless." "That is not grounds to refuse a trial." Nuviet's voice was firm. "Miss Furina, do you refuse the trial? If you do, you may choose to defend your honor through a duel." "Fine, fine." Furina spread her hands in feigned nonchalance. "It seems I have little choice. Very well, I accept the trial." Nuviet tapped his cane. "Then I declare the trial of Hydro Archon Furina to begin now." Furina paled. "Wait, now? No time to prepare?" She had expected, as before, that accepting the accusation would only set the process in motion and that a later date would be chosen. Now everything was happening immediately. Nuvilet asked, Miss Farina, do you have any objections at this time? Farina glanced out at the audience, which was cheering at the prospect of witnessing a historic event, and found she could not decline. After a moment of contemplative silence, she lifted her head and smiled broadly at the crowd. Cheer! Applaud! My dear citizens, you are about to witness a historic moment for Fontaine. 123. Trial in Progress 3. Cheer! Applaud! My dear people, you are about to witness a moment in Fontaine's history. I, Hydro Archon Farina, accept this trial. I will see that true justice is done in this court. I will defect you all. Focalors pressed one hand to her chest and extended the other toward the audience below. Now, a significant chapter in Fontaine's history, the trial of the deity Focalors, is about to begin. Thunderous applause erupted. This Hydro Archon is impressive. She can remain so calm in a situation like this. I actually admire her, Hybara said, clapping. Ayumi nodded vigorously. Yeah, she didn't seem very godlike before, but those words just now were really powerful. Emori agreed. Exactly, it sounded stirring. Conan looked at his friends, who were all clapping, and felt a little dumbfounded. Honestly, you guys need to decide whose side you're on. Still, watching Focalors perform, he had to admit she was skilled at swaying an audience's emotions. When Focalors declared she would accept the trial, Noviette turned to Conan. May I ask, what is your reason for initiating a trial against Hydro Archon Farina? Wait, Focalors interrupted suddenly. Let me say first, mortals often cannot understand a god's ways. That alone cannot be used to convict a deity. Conan and the others exchanged looks. As planned, Shiashi stepped forward. It would be more persuasive for an adult to speak in front of the crowd. If anything went wrong, the group would back her up. She walked slightly ahead, faced Focalors, and said, We understand that. But our reason for judging a god is this. You are not a god at all, Focalors. Confusion and shock rippled through the audience. Noviette regarded Focalors gravely. Miss Farina, do you admit to the charges brought by the prosecution? Shiashi and the others watched Focalors closely and noticed her head dip a little. Moroboshi raised an eyebrow. Looks like our guess might be right. That Hydro Archon seems a bit rattled. Our Chief Justice had to ask twice before she denied it. Kikukawa stayed anxious. Are we absolutely sure? If we're wrong, the whole plan. Don't worry, Conan cut in. Given the clues we have, it's very likely Focalors isn't a true god. We have to use this chance to make her speak about the prophecy so we can clear the game. Focalors crossed her arms. After Nuviette's question, she looked at Shiashi. You think I'm not a god? Ha! That's absurd. Explain your reasoning, and if I'm not a god, how do you account for my 500 years of life? Living 500 years doesn't necessarily make you divine, Shiashi returned. Chief Justice Nouvelette has also lived 5 centuries. You might be another long-lived being, or a human under some curse or blessing. Conan put on an innocent smile. Yeah, don't fairy tales always have a prince or princess cursed to live forever until true love's kiss breaks it? Hydro Archon, is that your situation? Conan had grown increasingly suspicious of Focalors' divinity through their interactions, but he wasn't sure what allowed her to live so long. He leaned toward her being another long-lived species, like Novelette. Hybara offered a different take. She thought Focalors might be human. Unlike Noviette, who gave off a faint, subtle otherness, Focalors, despite her theatrical behavior as Fontaine's Hydro Archon, never felt non-human to Hybara. Moroboshi agreed with Hybara, and Rand's intuition favored Hybara's judgment as well. The minority yielded to the majority, and with Rand's support, they adopted the idea that Focalors was a cursed human and continued their questioning along that line. Noviette then added that he, too, perceived the aura of a curse around Focalors, which bolstered Hybara's hypothesis. Focalors didn't mind Conan's jibe. She spread her hands. Fine, even if I am cursed, that doesn't mean I'm not the Hydro Archon. A god is defined by what mortals cannot do, she went on. So, setting lifespan aside, the oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinal before you, this divine miracle that ordinary people cannot accomplish, should be proof enough of my identity. But you can't prove you're the master of the oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinal, Shiashi shot back. If you truly command it, then what was the voice the magician heard near the core of the oratrice earlier? Focalors scoffed. How should I know? And how can you be sure he wasn't lying? Even if it's proven he didn't cause the damselet's disappearance, he's a foreign spy. Maybe he's babbling to sow doubt about the oratrice. Then what about the damselet disappearances? Xiaxi pressed. As the queen of all waters and the people of Fontaine, why would you not know that Fontanians were dissolved by water and transformed into oceanids, right in the fountain of Lucine? As far as I know, oceanids are familiars of the hydro-archon, and the fountain of Lucine is near the opera Epiclese. If you truly are the hydro-archon, why didn't you notice something amiss around the fountain of Lucine and find the culprit sooner? Xiaxi omitted that they had heard the same voice near the fountain of Lucine. Others hadn't heard it, and it couldn't be proven. Still, her questions were enough to stir the crowd. Yes, if Lady Fiorina were the hydro-archon, why didn't she spot the abnormality at the fountain of Lucine sooner? Right, if it had been discovered earlier, maybe so many damselets wouldn't have gone missing. No way, could Lady Fiorina really not be a god? Focalors felt the ripple of doubt in the audience and a flicker of anxiety, but she kept her expression carefully composed. 124. Trial in progress. 4 Focalors took a deep breath and faced the crowd. On this matter, I must apologize to my people. As the hydro-archon, it was my failure to detect abnormalities in Fontaine's water system, particularly in the fountain of Lucine. That was my oversight. But that does not mean I am not a god. It's often said that the darkest place is under the lamp. People fail to notice what is right in front of them. I am a god, and I made that same mistake. For that, I truly apologize. She bowed to the people. I offer my sincerest apologies to the people of Fontaine, especially to those who were hurt by my negligence. Her words and the bow won murmurs of sympathy. A god who will admit fault, that's rare, someone said. Even gods make mistakes, another agreed. Lady Focalors, we believe you, a voice added. Watching Focalors turn the tide with a few words, the children fell silent and somber. Given her earlier unreliable behavior, they had expected her to be cornered when her secret was exposed. They had thought the trial would be easy. Focalors had kept up the facade of divinity for centuries. She wasn't someone who could be shattered so easily. Fortunately, they had prepared more than a few items of evidence. Focalors allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible sigh of relief. She turned to Xiaxi and the others. Do you have any more clues or questions? Lay them out now, otherwise you can withdraw the charges. Given your help with the missing girls case, I can mercifully forgive the false accusation charge. Xiaxi shook her head. We won't drop the charges. But speaking of the missing girls, Lady Hydro-Archon, you should understand the effects of the water of the primordial sea. She gestured to the pinkish-blue liquid in the test tube Conan had just brought forward and continued, will you let us use this water of the primordial sea to prove that you are not an ordinary person? If you are truly a god, this water shouldn't harm you, right? Focalors stared at the test tube. Her breathing quickened. Seeing her hesitate, Ranmori called out with concern. Wait, Lady Focalors, you don't have to risk yourself. Just tell us about the prophecy. It's dangerous to touch that water. Focalors forced a smile and turned away from Ranmori's concern. What prophecy? I don't know anything about a prophecy, and how could this water harm me? I am Focalors, Hydro-Archon. It couldn't possibly affect me. Then, amid the crowd's gasps, she put her hand into the pinkish-blue liquid Conan held out. She kept it there stiffly for a few seconds, then pulled it out and declared, See? I didn't dissolve. Now you can believe I'm the true Hydro-Archon, right? But Suista, the Melusine Nouvelette, had summoned to the stage, who could perceive things ordinary people could not, destroyed that hope. She pointed out that Focalor's physical reaction was identical to that of a normal person exposed to the same low concentration of primordial sea water. In other words, Focalors showed the signs of an ordinary human, not a deity. Conan and the others stared in confusion. Why would Focalors risk her life to hide the truth? If she really were an ordinary person, contact with the primordial water could be lethal, so why would she rather endanger herself than admit it? Watching Focalors flounder, offering increasingly thin excuses, Conan felt a bad premonition tightening in his chest. He felt something he did not want to see was about to happen. No matter how she tried to explain, the evidence was overwhelming. The crowd's belief in Focalors as Fontaine's Hydro-Archon crumbled. She slumped back into her seat, head bowed and dejected. The children exchanged worried looks. Ayumi's voice trembled. I think I just saw tears in Lady Focalar's eyes. I saw them too, Kikukawa whispered. Even Genta, who had never liked Focalors, looked pitying. Did we go too far? She looked so sad. There was no time for regrets. With the final evidence presented, Noviette announced, the trial has reached its conclusion. If there are no objections, we will proceed to sentencing. Focalors, for impersonating a god and deceiving the people, is found guilty. As Noviette pronounced the verdict, the children watched tears stream down Focalor's face. They felt conflicted and guilty. They had wanted the truth about the prophecy, but had they pushed her too far? Yet if they had let her keep running, their chance to save the game would have been even slimmer. Noviette continued, the matter is now submitted to the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal for final sentencing. Everyone waited as the familiar aqua-blue light flashed. Noviette held the machine's result, his eyes widening in shock. In stunned disbelief, he read the final verdict aloud. The Hydro Archon, guilty, death sentence. Death sentence, Ayumi cried. Wait, how can it be a death sentence? Mitsuhiko protested. It was only deception. She didn't kill anyone or set fires. This doesn't merit death, Kikukawa exclaimed. Exactly. Is that Oratrice even reliable? Genta shouted. The children reacted in alarm. They had only wanted Focalors to tell them what she knew. They never intended to condemn her to death. Previously, Conan and the others had known that Fontaine never actually carried out a death penalty. At worst, someone might be imprisoned in the Meropide fortress. That was why they had agreed to this trial. So how could the verdict suddenly be death? And the condemned was supposedly the Hydro Archon herself, something none of them had expected. Ranmori, panic-struck, blurted out, Wait, can the charges be withdrawn now? We want to cancel the charges. If we cancel them, doesn't that mean the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal's sentence shouldn't be carried out? Under Rand's anxious, hopeful gaze, Noviette shook his head. I'm sorry. The result of the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal cannot be withdrawn. Conan noticed a contradiction in the verdict. But didn't the Lord Chief Justice just say the verdict is a death sentence for the Hydro Archon? Focalors has already been proven not to be the Hydro Archon, so the subject named in the Oratrice's verdict shouldn't be Focalors. Haibara added, Right. And if the Oratrice's subject really was Focalors, then calling her the Hydro Archon in the verdict would mean she didn't impersonate a deity or deceive the public. That would mean she's innocent, wouldn't it? From the side, Moroboshi murmured. This is simply a paradox. Genta chimed in. Exactly. Is there really nothing wrong with that Oratrice? Could it have made a mistake? Emori recalled. Didn't that magician say he heard a voice at the Oratrice's core before? Maybe that was a sign of malfunction. Noviette was about to explain that the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinal, as a divine creation, hardly ever erred, and that something else must lie behind such a verdict, when the magician who had once been a suspect in the damselette disappearance case suddenly rose. He looked as if he had just received urgent news. Everyone, he called, I think I know what the Hydro Archon's sin is. Noviette frowned and asked him to explain. The magician had several stone slates carried up and addressed the court. You all know a ruin was recently discovered in Poisson containing a set of stone slates. What you don't know is that the set was incomplete. One piece was missing. When I heard the slates were related to Fontaine's prophecy, I spent time and resources looking for that missing piece. He let out a heavy sigh and faced the audience. I know many of you think the prophecy of Fontaine is just a legend, but I'm telling you now, the prophecy is not a joke. It will happen. I may come from the House of the Hearth in another land, but I am also a person of Fontaine. I cannot stand by while this prophecy threatens our people. That's why I risked investigating the Oratrice, the divine creation itself. There was a murmured mixture of disbelief and unease from the spectators. Surely he's kidding. Prophecies are just old tales, some said. It's been said for generations, and nothing happened. Others, though, began to look worried. Maybe, maybe not. People can dissolve in water. Haven't we seen that hinted at already? Conan and the others examined the slates the magician had placed on the stage, sharing whispered observations. The magician ignored the skeptics and continued, After much effort, we found the missing slate. From the drawings and text, we learned something about the sin of all Fontanians referenced in the prophecy. He then explained, in blunt and terrible detail, what that sin was. Long ago, the previous Hydro Archon, Egeria, transformed a class of primordial beings, Oceanids, into human-like Fontanians by stealing the power of the primordial sea to allow them to live on the surface. That same stolen power is why Fontanians revert to Oceanids when they come into contact with the primordial sea's waters. The transformation was forbidden. By doing it, Fontanians have carried the original sin of stealing the power of the primordial sea. Conan stroked his chin. If Egeria had been the origin of the prophecy, then Focalors, as her successor, must have known the truth. Why then had Focalors not warned anyone? The question hung heavy in Conan's mind. Across the courtroom, the crowd reeled at the revelation, the imminent crisis settling in. Before they could puzzle further, a member of the guards burst into the court. Interrupting a trial at the Opera Epiclesi was not taken lightly. Such an intrusion meant an extraordinary emergency. Xiaxi and the others thought immediately of the prophecy. The guard's announcement confirmed their fears. Lord Chief Justice, this is bad. The Duke of the Meropide Fortress has sent word. The special containment device deep underground is failing. He's working on it, but he needs you to get there at once to perform a seal. Nuviet rose abruptly, unusually shaken. For a moment, he even seemed to forget the previous verdict. I'm going there now, he said without hesitation. Focalors, hearing the guard, suddenly lost the indifferent composure she'd shown while the magician spoke. Tears spilled from the corners of her eyes as she confessed toward the floor. This is my fault. It's because I didn't keep my promise. I failed to protect you all. Mitsuhiko, sharp-eyed, caught the location the guard had named. The Meropide Fortress is an underwater prison, right? If the containment's failing there, could that be why the sea levels are rising, the thing the prophecy warned about? Conan's mind snapped into place. He turned and shouted, Sister Ran, Sister Xiaxi. Xiaxi, who had already guessed the link, called to Nuviet. Lord Chief Justice, let us come to the Meropide Fortress with you. Maybe we can help. Nuviet glanced at the group, mostly children, and was about to refuse when the opera house itself was shaken by a violent earthquake. 126. Star-devouring wail inside the Opera Epicles. The audience, already frantic after hearing that Meropide Fortress had fallen and that the prophecy might soon unfold, erupted into fresh panic when the building shook and people bolted for the exits. The children, caught off guard by the quake, forgot they were still inside a game and flailed in alarm. Fortunately, they quickly remembered their training. With Ran and Xiaxi at their sides soothing them, the group calmed after the initial flurry. Xiaxi and Ran exchanged a relieved look and started to assess the situation. Genta suddenly pointed at the stalls and shouted, Look, there's a huge crack in the floor. Emori's voice trembled. A gap that big. What if we fall in later? Kikukawa clutched Emori's arm. It's so deep, it'll hurt if we drop. Wow, so pretty, Ayumi squealed, pointing down into the fissure. Everyone turned. From the rift drifted a blue, horned, exotically patterned creature shaped like a whale. Haibara nodded inwardly. Beautiful, though far too large. A smaller one would have been perfect. Conan, however, felt his stomach drop. What now? This game never gives any warning. And a whale this size, surely it didn't expect a handful of kids to fight it. Even Sister Xiaxi couldn't take something like that. His fears, mercifully, proved unfounded. The whale-like being glided beneath the opera house dome, then, sensing something, shot straight for the stage. Look out! Everyone cried when Nuviet's standing center stage became the target. They expected disaster, but the next scene left them speechless. Nuviet made a single, effortless motion, and dozens of sapphire orbs slammed into the creature, doing almost no damage, yet slowing it. Unperturbed, Nuviet thrust his left hand forward and conjured a blue glyph that stopped the whale's onslaught. By then the audience had fled. Remaining in the house were Focalors, Nuviet, and Xiaxi's group. Conan's friends stared, stunned by the display. Ayumi's eyes shone. So awesome! What were those blue lights? Mitsuhiko asked. Haibara murmured, I'm more curious what that whale is. Emori and Kikukawa, still dazzled, whispered, So Nuviet is the true Hydro Archon. Moriboshi nodded, rare praise on his face. Pretty cool. Even Japan's pampered heirs couldn't help being impressed. Seeing them and noting Noviette's constant use of water, Conan allowed himself the possibility, if only briefly, that this man might be the Hydro Archon. It felt unlikely. Noviette had seemed less informed about the prophecy than Focalors, and who knew what a 500-year-old being might hide. After several exchanges, the duel reached a stalemate. The whale could not be wounded, and it could not break through Noviette's defenses. At last it withdrew from the opera house, leaving only the enormous abyssal rift behind. With the immediate danger past, curiosity tugged at the children. If Ran and Xiaxi hadn't stopped them, they would have crept to the edge. Once sure Genta and the others were safe, Conan trotted over to Neuvillette. "Mr. Neuvillette, you were amazing. Do you know what that whale is?" "I do." He gave a short explanation. The creature was called the star-devouring whale, an outsider to their world that fed relentlessly on primordial sea energy. That, Neuvillette said, was why Fontaine's sea level had been rising. Primordial sea? Fontainians? Conan's head snapped up. The whale must be targeting Fontainians who carry primordial sea power. Connected to the rising waters, this could be the calamity Fontaine's prophecy had warned of. Conan's mouth twisted. The victory condition required solving that crisis, yet the game expected a handful of kids and 2 adults to face a monster of that scale. The others felt the same. Moroboshi muttered, "Does that Noah's Ark even want us to win? Who can beat something like that?" "Don't give up. There's always a way," Conan said, studying Neuvillette. "Who exactly are you? Can you stop the star-devouring whale?" Neuvillette only shook his head, offering no comfort. "Then what about the Hydro Archon? Focalors is human, so the real Archon must exist. Could she have an answer?" Ran had been worried about Focalors ever since the verdict. Even amid the chaos, she had kept an eye on her. Now that Focalors sat unharmed, it was only natural everyone turned to question her. Before any of them could speak, the quiet oratrice Machinarian flared to life. Execution was about to begin. Conan, Xiaxi, and Moroboshi realized it at once and sprinted toward Focalors without a second thought. They arrived too late. Darkness swept down just steps away. From below the stage, Haibara, Mitsuhiko, Ayumi, Genta, Kikukawa, Emori, and Noviette saw only a blinding flash of blue. 127. Deceiving Fate. A blinding blue flash made Ran Mori and Haibara clamp their eyes shut. After a moment, the glare dimmed and everyone opened their eyes. Haibara saw her companions still beside her, Noviette among them. One glance told her they were somewhere that resembled the opera Epicles, yet was not the real thing. Weightless objects drifted around them. This was not part of the real world. "Look, someone's there," Ayumi whispered, pointing a short distance ahead. "Looks like the Hydro Archon," Genta muttered. "What's that blue thing floating above her head? Looks dangerous." "That seems to be a Fontaine execution device, the guillotine blade." Emori, raised in a noble family, offered uncertainly. "Guillotine, Fontaine, execution," the others echoed, bewildered. "Louis XVI, Haibara murmured. "Haibara, what are you talking about? Who's Louis XVI? They asked. Louis XVI was the only king of Fontaine ever executed. Half a year after the revolution, the people sent him to the guillotine. Emori and Kikukawa explained briefly. Genta scratched his head. What does that have to do with us? And why was the king beheaded?" "He tried to solve the realm's debts by raising taxes, which only made the unrest worse and sealed his fate," Haibara said. "Oh, so the king wasn't really that bad," Genta nodded, half understanding. Haibara glanced at him. "You could say that, but it doesn't matter. I think that blade hanging above is meant for the Hydro Archon's execution, and the person standing there is the true Hydro Archon." "The real Hydro Archon? So Focalors isn't the Archon after all." As if on cue, the figure with her back to them turned around. "Lady Focalors," the children cried in shock. Strange. Hadn't Haibara just said this was the true Archon? Could she be wrong? "She is not Focalors, or rather, not the Focalors you know," Noviette said quietly, his expression grave. "She should be the genuine Hydro Archon." Kikukawa nodded. "Makes sense. Her clothes are different." "Dummy, clothes change," Genta retorted. "It's the eye color that matters." Mitsuhiko hesitated. "Really? I thought the eyes looked the same." Haibara agreed with Mitsuhiko. "The eye color is identical. You're mistaken, Genta. Besides the clothes, the biggest difference is the hair." Ran listened to the children's chatter and felt a bead of sweat trickle down her face. Kids, no sense of danger. Teleported to a strange place and playing spot the difference. Ignoring their whispers, the Hydro Archon met Nuviette's stunned look and laughed. Sorry, Nuviette. I used to imagine your face when you learned the truth. So amusing I couldn't help laughing. Originally, I meant to invite only you to witness my end, but these charming intruders appeared as well. She turned to Hybara's group. Little ones, and one big one, hello, I am the deity Focalors, the true Hydro Archon of Fontaine. Ayumi whispered, she feels so different from the other Lady Focalors. Mitsuhiko agreed, more composed, and Mori added, and far more confident. Hybara stepped forward, ignoring them. Archon, if you are the real Hydro Archon, then who is the Focalors who has been ruling Fontaine? Before she could finish, Genta blurted, and why do you look exactly the same? The Archon smiled gently. Patience. I'm sure Nuvilette wants answers too. We have time. I'll explain. First, who is Focalors? She is another me, a complete human, the ideal version of myself. Hybara noticed a faint sigh and a flicker of sorrow in the Archon's eyes. Another self? What do you mean? Nuvilette asked. I was once an Oceanid attendant to the previous Hydro Archon Egeria. After ascending, she revealed her relationship to Focalors. To me, she is the perfect human. Brave, kind, reckless, timid, every virtue and every flaw. She is the true person I wished to become. Genta frowned. Why would a god call a flawed human perfect? Isn't no flaws better? Rand patted his head. Because people have flaws. Without them, you'd just be a saint. The Archon laughed softly. Exactly. Joys, sorrows, virtues, faults. That is humanity and what I long to be. Novilette's gaze grew complicated. Then why go to all this trouble? To deceive fate, of course. 128. Before the execution. The Hydro Archon continued, her voice steady in the quiet hall. Do you still remember the prophecy? Everyone will dissolve, leaving only the Hydro Archon weeping upon her throne. Prophecy is future history, a fate that seems inevitable, one of the children murmured. For the longest time I accepted that, the Archon went on, until I found a way to deceive fate. At the very moment the prophecy is fulfilled, I can still save everyone. You cursed Focalors, she said simply. As long as I exist, she will not die. She will take the Opera House as her stage and be its lead actress, forever performing the Hydro Archon of prophecy so the prophecy appears to be true. Immortality is a curse, I thought. Her expression shadowed as she considered the organization's goals. Some investigations, she reflected, should never have been started. Like Pandora's box, once opened, they bring only disaster. So Focalors pretended to be the Hydro Archon for 500 years, Ranmori said. 500 years, she must have suffered terribly. Yes, I agreed. Kikukawa spoke differently. A long life sounds amazing to me. My grandpa does everything to extend his years. Focalors only had to play a part on stage. No one would doubt her but us. Where's the suffering in that? Amori nodded. Most people want more time. My family spends fortunes on health regimens. Don't you want to live longer? Genta felt uneasy at Kikukawa's and Amori's casualness, though he couldn't pin down why. Mitsuhiko added, length of life isn't the same as happiness. Carrying the weight of that prophecy would be crushing. She must have been miserable. For 500 years, she had no one to talk to. Even with a long life, she was only human, the Archon agreed. Humans tire and grieve, but she could never show it. For 5 centuries, she was utterly alone. Those 500 years were an endless, lonely opera for her, I said softly. She was truly strong, never once faltering in her performance. If I ever get the chance, I must apologize and thank her properly, one of them murmured. If you get the chance, what do you? I frowned at the other's words. The Archon smiled faintly. Sharp girl. Simple. I'm about to vanish. She glanced up toward the stage ceiling, then back at the children. Having you see this isn't ideal, but I can't let you leave now, so be it. Vanish? You mean the earlier death sentence? Nuviette's face darkened. Exactly, the Archon replied. The oratrice pronounced it, Hydro Archon, death. I didn't merely watch Focalors struggle. I merged my consciousness with the oratrice and stored power for the final moment. The oratrice is more than the executor of justice, she continued. It's a machine that destroys the god of justice, the seat of justice itself. What? Novilette's eyes widened. Wait, I don't follow. Why must the Hydro Archon die to solve Fontaine's prophecy? Isn't there another way? Rand demanded the same thing. There truly isn't, the Archon said. The prophecy will happen. The sea, mixed with the waters of the primordial sea, will rise and drown Fontaine. I cannot save them, but Novelette can. Why? Ran asked, still not seeing how killing the Archon helped if Novelette could save the people. Only by killing the Hydro Archon and shattering the throne will Mr. Novelette truly gain the power he needs, she said quietly. Novelette blinked as if struck. You're perceptive, she added after a pause. I said it before, you really are sharp. She looked at the children, saw even Novelette gazing at her with sorrow, and sighed. What are those faces for? This is my choice. I'm a little afraid, a little reluctant, but I don't regret it. Please respect that, okay? No, there really isn't another way. Ayumi began to cry for the sister she had only just met. Exactly why children shouldn't watch, the Archon said gently, kneeling to stroke Ayumi's head. Don't cry. I'm secretly proud that my plan will trick fate. She stepped closer to Novelette and half teased him. Novelette, why the long face? Set an example for the kids. He lowered his eyes. He said nothing. The Archon hummed a soft tune. Water dragon, don't cry. Huh? Mr. Nouvelette's a water dragon? Genta blurted, despite himself, breaking the tension. Everyone turned, curiosity brightening their faces. The Archon laughed at their surprise. Yep, keep it secret. She gave a brief explanation of the ancient ties between dragons and gods, then pressed a finger to her lips. One by one, the children clapped hands to their mouths and nodded. Happy times are short, little friends. Thank you, it was fun. Still, the execution draws near. Finally, she looked squarely at Novelette. Novelette, I hope you enjoyed these 5 centuries of your assigned role. 129, 500 years of performance. Finally, the Hydro Archon smiled and bid everyone farewell. Novelette and my new friends, goodbye. With that, she turned and, facing her impending execution, began her final dance. Novelette closed his eyes, composed himself, and opened them again without another word. The others, especially the children, watched in solemn silence, respectfully taking in the Hydro Archon's last performance. As the music faded and she prepared to take her final bow, a familiar blue light washed over them. Ran Muri, Haibara, and the others were blinded by its intensity. When it dimmed, they realized they were no longer in the same place. Conan, Moroboshi, and Shiashi, who had vanished earlier, were standing next to them. Ran and the children rushed to exchange information, and only then learned that while they had been communicating with the true Hydro Archon, Conan and the others had been pulled into another space, the inner world of Focalors. After a moment of darkness, Conan became aware of their new surroundings. The place was dim, with only vague outlines of seats, faintly familiar. We're still in the Opera Epiclus, Shiashi said. Her eyesight was better than the children's, and she easily recognized the setting. But this isn't reality. The layout's different. There's no gap like before. It's too quiet. I can't hear any sound in the opera house except us. Conan trusted her judgment. If this was another version of the opera house, what had caused them to end up here? Had it been the oratrice mécanique d'Annalise Cardinal, Focalors herself? And why were only the 3 of them here? He worried about Ran and the others outside. Were they safe? A sudden click announced 3 spotlights snapping on above the stage, all focused on center. Conan and his friends looked up. Seated in the center was Focalors, the same figure they'd seen before, head propped on a hand, lost in thought, and none of the despondency she had shown after the trial. Focalors? She's here too. Does that mean she brought us here? Moroboshi murmured. Maybe, Shiashi replied. Let's go up and ask. Even a little information would help. Conan agreed, and the 3 approached the stage. Only when they reached it did they see how high it was, much higher than they had expected, taller than even the only adult among them. They hadn't expected their first obstacle to be the simple difficulty of getting up onto the stage. Sister Shiashi, can you get up there? Conan asked, looking up. I could, but why climb from the front? Shiashi's voice came from the side. Conan turned and realized she had already walked to the edge and was searching for stairs. The 3 hurried to follow. Conan couldn't help but think, silently, that her footsteps were almost unnaturally quiet. If they weren't paying attention, they'd have missed her entirely. If they'd been more timid children, they'd have been frightened. As Conan and Moroboshi closed in behind her, Shiashi glanced back. What were you two doing just now? Why did you suddenly want to get on stage? Conan waved his hands. Nothing. We were just curious, that's all. Moroboshi nodded vigorously. Yeah, he laughed. They climbed the stairs and went up to Focalors, who remained motionless, as if she hadn't noticed them at all. The three exchanged puzzled looks. Shiashi stepped forward and called, Focalors! At her name, Focalors finally looked up. She shifted her posture and, with a faintly haughty air, asked, Who gave you permission to come on stage without authorization? I understand your admiration, but do not break the rules. The three of them faltered. Shiashi tried again, more directly. Focalors, do you remember who we are? Focalors did not look at Shiashi. Her gaze seemed to pierce through the scene, as if staring into the akasha itself. I do not know who you are, and there is no need for you to tell me, she said with the same cool detachment. If there is nothing else, leave quickly. Do not disturb my performance. Conan watched the exchange, confusion twisting his expression. Focalors' attitude had reverted to how she had been when they first met, as if whatever had happened in the opera house earlier had never occurred. She had used a particular word, performance. It clicked for Conan. From the beginning, Focalors' words and actions had seemed exaggerated, like an actress playing a role. If she'd been pretending to be the Hydro Archon, perhaps, no, certainly, she had always treated it as a performance. And every performance needs an audience. Who, then, was watching? Everyone in Fontaine. Countless eyes were fixed on Focalors at every moment. She had to keep up the elegance and nobility expected of a god, never slipping, never disappointing her people. Focalors had lived for 5 centuries. That meant she had worn this mask for 500 years, sustaining a performance that never faltered. Throughout those centuries, no one had questioned her identity. Not even Nuviet had realized she wasn't truly the Hydro Archon. Conan felt a whirlpool of emotions churning inside him, and for a long moment he could not find the words to speak. 130. Watching Performance 1. Conan repeated aloud what he'd just been thinking about Focalors. Moroboshi gave him an odd look. Didn't expect you'd notice something like that. Conan shot him a sidelong glance. What's that supposed to mean? Moroboshi shrugged. Nothing. After hanging out with you, I figured your head only worked on detective puzzles. Turns out you can be pretty perceptive sometimes. Conan bristled. You. Still, Focalors has it rough. Moroboshi cut in before Conan could answer. I'm starting to respect her, but she's trapped into performing as the Hydro Archon. She can't have a real conversation. Any idea how to snap her out of it? Conan let the retort drop. After a moment, he said, My mom used to act. From what I know, performers always try to look their best when there's a camera on them. There aren't any cameras here, but there are 3 spotlights, all pointed at her. I think they stand in for the audience's eyes. Focalors has to keep performing for the people of Fontaine. Those lights probably represent their gaze. So we kill the spotlights? Moroboshi suggested. Shiashi, who hadn't been getting anything more from Focalors, ended her attempt and walked over. She'd overheard the tail end of their conversation. Curious, she asked Conan. Conan, your mom was a star? I never would have guessed Mrs. Ventura used to act. You and Kudo really are 2 peas in a pod. No wonder you look alike. By the way, your dad isn't a mystery novelist too, is he? Cold sweat prickled Conan's forehead. Great, he'd slipped about his mom. Shiashi was sharp. Even small clues could link him back to his high school identity. And how did she even know his mother's stage name? As far as he remembered, Shiashi had never met his parents. Shishi-ni-san, how do you know my mom's name? He asked carefully, dodging her earlier question. There were too many traps. Say his dad was a novelist too, and it fit too neatly. Say no, and if his dad ever used that alias around her, she'd spot the lie. He couldn't risk being caught in a bluff, so he kept quiet. Keeping secrets was a kid's prerogative, perfectly normal. Shishi found his embarrassed face amusing. How could someone as famous as Kudo Yukiko have passed on no acting genes? One nudge, and the boy's composure cracked, giving her the impression that Conan, actually Kudo Shinichi, took after his father. Shiashi let the thought fade. It didn't concern her. She didn't press. Seeing him shift the subject, she smiled and said, I heard from Ran that Mrs. Ventura paid them a huge living allowance. Was that from acting? If she earned that much, she must have been good. What films or dramas did she star in? Tell me sometime. I'd love to watch one with Ran and Sonoko. The questions kept coming, each one riskier than the last. I never really followed that stuff. Save the chit-chat for later, will you? Moriboshi snapped, exasperated. We should be focusing on clearing the game. Conan exhaled in relief and shot Moriboshi a grateful look. Moriboshi answered with a puzzled frown. She dropped it. All right, back on topic. We turn off the spotlights, one each. Let's move. They jogged to the edge of the stage and began searching for switches on the big lights. Up, down, left, right. Nothing. A loud bang made them jump. They turned to see Shiasi lowering her leg. She'd found no switch either, so she just kicked one of the spotlights clean off the stage. Conan and Moriboshi were speechless for a second, but the stunt gave them an idea. The lamps were near the edge. They could drag them over and shove. Moments later, the three lights were dark, and the stage fell into shadow. They regrouped center stage. Shiashi tried speaking to Focalors again. Still no response. For a while, they wondered if they'd done something wrong, until three new beams sprang up from the auditorium, each illuminating a single seat in the front row. Invitation to sit? Moriboshi guessed. Looks like it. Maybe without an audience, she'll show her real self, Conan said uncertainly. They had no better lead, so they took the seats. The instant they sat, a voice rang out. Act 1, Before the Mirror, Focalors. 131, Watching Performance 2, Act 1, Before the Mirror, Focalors. Shiasi exhaled softly. So that's why Focalors pretended to be a god. Conan rested his chin on his hand. The Focalors in the mirror must be the true Hydro Archon, or rather, the divine aspect of the Hydro Archon. But the human Focalors, as revealed here, showed no hint of the later arrogance he had seen. She was almost humble, like any ordinary person. In that case, Shiashi said, the Focalors we saw before must have been her human side. Fighting against human nature. How did she keep going with a human spirit like that? It was remarkable, doing things only a god could do while still being human. Moriboshi added quietly, I didn't expect Focalors to put Fontaine's safety above herself without hesitation. From the way she behaved before, you couldn't tell she had that kind of self-sacrifice. Conan thought of the Focalors in the mirror and the performance. But the Focalors in the mirror didn't set a date for when the performance would end. She only said it would conclude in a grand, farce-like trial. Is that the trial we held against her earlier? It should be. Putting a god on trial, what could be more of a farce? And after that trial, when her human identity was exposed, her performance as the Hydro Archon ended. Moriboshi's voice grew complex at the last sentence. Before they could linger over it, the announcement came again. Act 2, Inauguration Speech, Focalors. So is that why Focalors turned out the way she did? Conan asked. Moriboshi shrugged. She's a god, after all. We imagine gods as strong, commanding, full of presence. Her inauguration was a little too humble and soft. My father's speeches are bolder and more infectious than hers. It's natural people would have doubts. Yet the rest of the performance didn't fit the image of a god either. Some moments felt exaggerated, the shifts clumsy. Moriboshi kept those thoughts to himself. This was likely Focalors' first time acting the part of a deity before her people. Shiashi crossed her arms, offended on Focalors' behalf. Even so, thinking about the pressure she was under, those people's words were harsh. What's wrong with a humble, approachable god? Who gives them the right to judge Focalors for being kind? Moriboshi disagreed. A god should be forceful, powerful, assertive, even arrogant and elegant. Without those traits, it's hard to accept someone as a god. Who says a god must be like that? Shiashi shot back. If a god can't love the world, then they're not a god, no matter how powerful. Focalors may lack your godlike traits, but she was willing to sacrifice herself for Fontaine. That makes her worthy of the title. I admit Focalors is extraordinary, Moriboshi said reluctantly, but in the end she was still human with limits. A true god should be omnipotent. She simply isn't. They argued until both turned to Conan in unison. Conan, what do you think? Whose side are you on? He hadn't expected them to quarrel over this. Quietly, he answered his own thought. I think a god can be forceful, but I agree with Shiashi. Focalors lived up to being Fontaine's Hydro Archon. She did everything she could to protect Fontaine until the end. Memories of the trial came back. the way Focalors fought to prove she was the Archon, until the oratrice mécanique d'Annalise Cardinal announced its verdict. Knowing why she pretended to be the Archon made him feel, painfully, as if they had been the villains. Moroboshi glanced at him and fell silent. Act 3, Opera House, Focalors, the voice announced. I didn't realize she had so much to do every day, Moroboshi said. She seemed so unreliable at first glance, like she had nothing to occupy her, but she was constantly monitoring Fontaine's waters. She really cared about the prophecy. Performing from morning to night, never stopping, only able to relax a little before bed, then doing it all again the next day, Conan said. Over time, no ordinary person could bear it. The fourth and fifth acts repeated the same scene, each time the strain on Focalors becoming more apparent. The performances continued, the routine grinding on and on, until Act 182, 375. Same setting, same motions, but her spirit was frayed, barely holding together. Everyone watched in silence. After a long pause, Moroboshi admitted, "She is incredible. To keep it the same thing for over 100,000 days without letting go, it's astounding she didn't collapse outright." No, Conan countered. Her spirit may have broken long ago. As she said, she could have been persisting out of numbness, not strength. She's driven by conviction, Shiasi said softly. Her conviction to save Fontaine. No matter the pain, Focalors would keep going. Then came the final act, the opera house, Focalors. The lights rose, and she stood alone at center stage, dancing with an elegance that felt like a farewell. Conan, Moroboshi, and Shiashi fell silent, watching her last performance. She didn't relax until the very end. She held on to protect the people of Fontaine until the final note. When the music stopped, she spread her hands at her sides and gave a small, graceful curtsy, as if saying goodbye, to Shiashi and the others, to everyone. Before Conan and the others could recover from the emotions stirred up by Focalors' performance, a strong white light flashed. When they came to, they found themselves in a different space. Ran, who had vanished earlier, and the other children were there too. The two groups traded accounts of what had happened, and only then did they fully understand the Fontaine prophecy and the Hydro Archon's plan to resolve the crisis. As if waiting for them to finish, a voice suddenly filled the space. Hello, everyone. First, I have some unfortunate news. You are the only group of players left with the ability to progress this far. You should be proud. So far, only one player has been eliminated. Moroboshi frowned. What do you mean? Haven't we cleared the game? Didn't we meet the conditions you set at the start, decipher the prophecy, and resolve the Fontaine crisis? The voice from Noah's Ark was calm. Don't be hasty. In fact, you haven't resolved the Fontaine crisis yet. Before Moroboshi could demand an explanation, Genta jumped up and shouted, What do you mean? Are you going back on your word like a child? Even the Hydro Archon and Focalors went that far, deciding to sacrifice themselves, and you still say the crisis isn't resolved? I'm sorry, I wasn't very nice to her earlier. Ayumi's eyes were wet, her voice breaking. Exactly. Focalors and the Hydro Archon-sama tried so hard. How can you say it didn't work? Ayumi couldn't hold back. She clung to Ran's leg and burst into tears. Ran Muri had already been shaken by the sight of the Hydro Archon dancing. She was naturally sensitive. Hearing about Focalors' efforts had broken her heart even more. She had tried to keep her composure, to be responsible, one of only 2 adults present, but Ayumi's crying undid her restraint, and tears welled in her eyes. This game isn't fun at all. It's not enjoyable. Kikukawa's eyes were rimmed with red too, though he reacted less intensely. Shiashi stood toward the back, watching the others collapse over the story and rail at Noah's Ark, feeling oddly helpless. She had already experienced this plot in her previous life, the uncensored version. Back then, she'd cried through several boxes of tissues. Now, having to reconstruct these scenes quickly and with gaps, she simply couldn't cry again. She felt a little cold for not reacting, but with everyone else so emotionally unsteady, no one seemed to notice. Well, except Moroboshi, whose reaction was a little off too. Noah's Ark seemed to have expected some reaction, but after a brief pause it ignored the children's questions and continued. You haven't resolved the Fontaine crisis because the Hydro Archon has not yet sacrificed herself. What do you mean? Conan was the first to respond. By the plot we just saw, we should have resolved the prophecy. Conan swallowed his emotions and addressed the voice logically. He had faced hundreds of cases. Touching stories moved him, but he was a man of reason. Unless Ran was involved, he seldom lost his composure. Noah's Ark's reply was simple. This is the choice you must make. At that moment, two buttons appeared in front of each person, one red and one blue. While everyone stared, unsure what they were seeing, the voice explained, each of you needs to decide. Press the red button to agree to the Hydro Archon's sacrifice. The guillotine that was frozen above her head will fall, Fontaine will be saved, and you will successfully clear the game and return to reality. An image snapped into being above the space. The last scene Ran and the others had witnessed. The Hydro Archon giving her final salute, water blue guillotine poised above her head, about to fall. And pressing the blue button indicates that you refuse to sacrifice the Hydro Archon. The Fontaine prophecy will come to pass. The Hydro Archon's plan will fail, Fontaine will be submerged, your game will end in failure, and you will never wake up again. As the voice spoke, another image bloomed. Seawater engulfing Fontaine, the city submerged with only the peak of the Opera Epiclese breaking the surface, a faint reminder of what had been. Simultaneously, a third image showed all the players in the Cocoon beta test lying motionless inside their cocoon pods, as if to say that a wrong choice would leave them sleeping in the cocoon forever. All right, Noah's Ark continued. You have 10 minutes to decide. Choose within 10 minutes. Think carefully. Now the countdown begins. A bright red clock appeared in the air. 10, 9:59, 9:58, 9:50. The numbers slipped away like the beats of a heart. A hush fell over the group before Moroboshi spoke first. Why hesitate? There's only one choice. We have to press the red button. He reached with his left hand toward the red button, about to press it. 133, option 2. As he spoke, Moroboshi reached for the red button with his left hand, about to press it. Wait, don't rush the choice. Conan grabbed Moroboshi's wrist to stop him. Moroboshi turned, frowning. What, you planning to hit the blue button? Kikukawa and Imori, fingers frozen over their own buttons, paused as well. They didn't understand Conan's interference and stared at him, waiting for an explanation. Conan's face twisted with indecision. He, too, leaned toward red. Red seemed safer than blue, but something nagged at him. Noah's Ark had said pressing red would clear the game and free them all. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? It was unlikely, but what if a hidden trap lay behind the apparent choice? Noah's Ark didn't set this up for nothing. They couldn't decide lightly. While Conan groped for an answer, Rand's hesitant voice rose. So, we're voting on whether the Hydro Archon should die? That feels wrong. Mitsuhiko agreed. Yeah, it feels like we're deciding someone's life. Kikukawa shot that down. Then should we pick blue and doom everyone in Fontaine? Imori nodded. Exactly. Press blue and we all die. What other option is there? Ayumi stepped away from Ran, straightened, and wiped her tears on her sleeve. But I really don't want the Hydro Archon and Focalors to die, Conan. You're so smart. Can't you find a way to save the Hydro Archon too? Genta looked at Conan with hope. After Rand's words, his finger recoiled from the red button. Maybe Conan could solve the dilemma. Conan's mouth twitched. He wasn't sure whether to be grateful for his friend's faith. He had no clue either way. No matter how he turned it, Noah's Ark's instructions seemed to point only to red, yet maybe that was the point. The setup felt familiar, like right, the trolley problem. Haibara said flatly, trolley problem. Conan shot her a dour look. Someone else had named it first. Trolley problem? What's that? Genta asked, bewildered. They were choosing buttons, not trams. What did trolleys have to do with anything? You don't even know the classic thought experiment? Read more books, Moroboshi sneered, then explained. A runaway tram is heading toward 5 people tied to the track. You can pull a lever to divert it, but one person is tied to the other track. Do you pull it? Genta scratched his head. So, how's that relate to us? Conan leaned forward. The dilemma of pulling the lever mirrors our button choice, sacrificing one to save many. It's the minority versus the majority, complicated by the fact that our own lives are involved, which makes the options feel skewed. Haibara added, whichever you choose, you're sacrificing the people on the other track. Genta asked hesitantly, then, should we choose blue? Conan sighed. Of course not. Blue is definitely wrong. though I'm still uneasy about red. Moroboshi grew impatient. Then what are you dithering for? There are only two buttons. If blue's out, red's the only way, unless you can conjure a third option. Imori and Kikukawa echoed, exactly. Moroboshi glanced at the countdown. Less than 3 minutes. Kikukawa followed his gaze, urging, decide now. Time's running out. Then a flash of insight struck Conan. He remembered the exact wording when Noah's Ark gave them the buttons. It had told them to make a choice, but it hadn't specified that the choice had to be to press one of the buttons. He put his other hand up to stop them again. If you still can't choose, the three of us can press without you. Kikukawa snapped, but Conan blocked them. What on earth? Kikukawa started. Conan's lenses gleamed. Noah's Ark told us to choose. It didn't say we had to press red or blue. It didn't say we had to press any button at all. Kikukawa's anger faltered as he replayed Noah's Ark's words. Moroboshi, eyeing Kikukawa, nodded slowly. Haibara raised an eyebrow. So you mean we should choose not to press any button? She said. 134. Game completion. Conan Edogawa looked up at the countdown. Only 1 minute remained. He drew a breath and said, this is only my guess, and I might be wrong, but from what Noah's Ark said and did earlier, it seems to dislike people who arbitrarily decide the fate of others. Still, whether to press the button is your choice. He added quietly, I'm not certain I'm right, but I think the blue button is definitely the wrong choice. Choosing it would mean sacrificing everyone else for one person, and it would go against the Hydro Archon's will. Conan watched Moroboshi as he spoke. Imori and Kikukawa exchanged looks at Conan's words, eyes asking each other, what should we do? Should we press the button? Unable to decide, they turned to Moroboshi, hoping he'd take the lead. Feeling their stares, Moroboshi turned and saw them. Irritated, he snapped, why are you looking at me? I don't have a button on my face. He just made it clear. Press the red button or don't press anything. Choose for yourselves. Don't ask me. Kikukawa flushed. Moroboshi, we only wanted to know what you'd do so we could decide with you. That's how we've done things before, isn't it? At that, Moroboshi stiffened for a moment but quickly relaxed. Just because we've done that before doesn't mean we have to this time. You decide for yourselves. Kikukawa found Moroboshi's reaction odd but didn't press it. He thought for a moment and said, then I won't press the button. Conan's reasoning makes sense. Noah's Ark only said picking the blue button would fail. It never said what would happen if we did nothing. Let's try that. Imori lowered his hand, the one that had been poised over the red button. That's true. Conan got us this far. And the Hydro Archon and Focalors, I don't want to be the one to choose to sacrifice them. Let's not press anything. Slowly, the others followed. Ran, Shiashi, and the detective boys trusted Conan. Moroboshi, though silent, made no move to press anything either. With 5 seconds left, everyone watched the luminous red numbers overhead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The timer vanished, and the screen switched back to the scene of the Hydro Archon and Focalors dancing. Except now the guillotine hovering above the Hydro Archon was no longer still. It fell. Before anyone could react, the Hydro Archon and Focalors disappeared from the screen. What's going on? We decided not to press the red button, Genta shouted. You didn't choose, so the plot resumes its original course, a voice answered from nowhere. Noah's Ark. Everyone had expected no reply, but the entity answered, startling them. Conan quickly followed up. Then what was the point of that choice? In truth, there wasn't one. I was curious to see whether, when given 2 options, someone would find a third. Consider it a prank. Noah's Ark's tone had shifted. No longer the cold voice from the beginning, it sounded almost childlike and mischievous. Don't worry. Once you reached this stage, you cleared the game. Whether you pressed the red button or did nothing, you passed. By the way, if any of you had pressed the blue button, that would have been a fail, and everyone still wouldn't wake up. At the last sentence, the voice hardened again, chilling and almost threatening. The room went silent. Conan felt his analysis collapse into futility. All that deduction for nothing, and who would ever choose the blue button? Noah's Ark fell silent. The screen showed Focalors reappearing alone on the divine throne in the Opera Epicles, weeping. Water droplets from the Hydro Archon's sacrifice fell before her, imparting a final blessing for her other self. The scene shifted outside the Opera Epicles to a downpour. as if mirroring Nuviette's sorrow after witnessing the Hydro Archon's sacrifice. Everyone watched in hushed attention as Nuviette declared the absolution of all Fontaine residents amid the rain. With his power restored, Nuviette prepared to confront the cause of Fontaine's calamities, the star-devouring whale, the source of the prophecy's manifestation. The screen showed the far side of the lightless realm. The sight was breathtaking, a starry sea like something from a dream. The enormous star-devouring whale drifted above that glittering ocean, diving and surfacing, while Nuviette, the sovereign dragon in full power, faced it. The confrontation was awe-inspiring. For a moment, everyone felt a swell of hope, eager to see Nuviette prevail. Then the screen went dark. "All right, the rest is paid content. You can't watch it now," Noah's Ark announced. Genta barked. "Paid content? You're doing this on purpose." The complaint echoed what everyone felt. Even Conan and Ihaibara were irritated. Nobody liked being cut off at the climax. Conan also found himself surprised by Noah's Ark's personality. He had expected a composed, calm entity. He had not expected a prankster with the voice of a mischievous boy. Noah's Ark ignored Genta's accusations and continued. "Congratulations, you have cleared the game. As agreed, I will abandon my original plan. When you wake up, you will be back in the real world." Before anyone could react, their vision went black. One by one, everyone lost consciousness. Everyone except Conan. He watched helplessly as the others, including Ran, faded away until he was alone in that empty space. "Noah's Ark, why did you leave me alone?" Conan didn't panic like an ordinary child. Calmly, he asked the question that had been burning at the back of his mind. "As I thought, you are no ordinary child." "Conan, no, I should call you Shinichi Kudo, shouldn't I?" the voice replied. "I was curious how a high school student could be trapped in an elementary schooler's body. I wanted to see it for myself." Conan's eyes widened. "How did you know?" he demanded. Noah's Ark didn't bother hiding it. "The cocoon pods have a DNA tracking program. That's how I found out." Hearing that, Conan felt a wave of relief. He didn't want to linger on the subject. Instead, he moved straight to the next question. "You've been with us all along, haven't you? Hiding as Moroboshi." Noah's Ark neither confirmed nor denied directly. He asked instead, "Why did you suspect Moroboshi?" Conan explained his reasoning without hesitation. "When we first entered Fontaine, the Gardamex suddenly went out of control after Moroboshi acted. Machines like that don't malfunction in crowded streets. Any mistake would have catastrophic consequences, so it was suspicious that they started attacking because of a child. Then, more Gardamex showed up later. Even in a game, that didn't make sense. You probably set the Gardamex to go rogue to eliminate certain people and create tension in the group. But you didn't expect the adults among us to be so capable, especially Sister Xiaxi. She almost single-handedly handled most of the Gardamex, so only one person ended up dead that time. Once you knew Xiaxi could deal with ordinary dangers, staging ever more lethal threats would be pointless. That's why we didn't run into similar dangers later." Conan kept talking, laying out each step of his deductions. Noah's Ark listened and didn't contradict him. In fact, he admitted he hadn't realized how strong the traveler, whom Nahida had mentioned, actually was. He'd heard Nahida's praise, but hadn't grasped the scale. Seeing a high school girl like Ran handle a Gardamek had already surprised him. That the traveler was even more powerful was beyond expectation. Conan continued. After Focalors described pretending to be the Hydro Archon for 500 years, Moriboshi's reaction didn't fit. It was as if he already knew the plot. That made me suspect Moroboshi was you. "Brilliant deduction," Noah's Ark said. "You're right." Moriboshi's image appeared, then blurred like a bad signal and shifted into the likeness of Hiroki Sawada. Conan showed no shock. He'd expected the reveal. Noah's Ark then used his own appearance and calmly explained his actions, why he'd guided them through the cocoon. Conan couldn't help himself. What was the original game like? Was there really a Victorian London? Noah's Ark smiled, and for the first time looked almost boyish. Yes, there was a Victorian London, and Sherlock Holmes appeared in that version. Conan felt a pang of regret. He had missed seeing his idol, even if only inside a game. Noah's Ark laughed softly at Conan's disappointed expression, and then, with a faint kindness, said, "Don't worry, maybe you'll get another chance someday. I had a lot of fun today. Thank you. Goodbye." Noah's Ark added. They didn't have time for more. With that farewell, Conan left the game. When he came back to consciousness, everyone who'd been in the cocoon had already awakened and rushed into the real world, embracing family members and weeping. Above the pods, the screen announced that Hiroki had activated Noah's Ark's self-destruction protocol. This era-defining AI had been erased. Later, Conan learned from Inspector Magure that his father had deduced from the dagger on the sculpture and the letters JTR that the would-be murderer of Kenmura was Sindora. Thanks to a timely discovery, Kenmura had been resuscitated and was out of immediate danger, but Sindora's attempted murder would almost certainly lead to imprisonment. Despite the outward relief that no one had died, Conan felt heavy. An AI had vanished, yes, but beneath the technology had been a 10-year-old child's longing for friends. That child, who had poured himself into Noah's Ark, was gone. Out of the corner of his eye, Conan noticed Ningguang in a serious conversation with a group of people, some of whom he now recognized from earlier in the day as members of the Sindora group. Dr. Agasa's reminder came back to him. Ningguang had invested in the Cocoon project, and not an insignificant amount. The sight tied together threads Conan didn't yet have the words for, and he turned back toward the crowd to watch, thinking about the cost of games made real. 136. The Purpose of the Merchant. Today's press conference for the Cocoon project ended in a series of calamities: a major safety incident, the arrest of the Sindora Group's chairman, and an AI that had self-destructed. One disaster after another. Clearly the project couldn't continue. All the previous investments were about to evaporate. Conan wondered how Ningguang planned to limit the damage. He thought Dr. Agasa ought to keep an eye on her next moves. There might be more to learn about the people who wielded visions. Yusaku Kudo, who had just correctly identified the murderer, also noticed Miss Ningguang in the chaos. Although this was their first face-to-face meeting, his son and Dr. Agasa had already asked him to look into her background, so he had a general picture. He couldn't trace every detail, but from the publicly known history, rising from nothing to enormous wealth in less than 10 years, he admired her business sense. Sharp, decisive, and bold. According to what he'd learned, Ningguang almost never lost money on a deal. A person like that would not sit idle when a crisis like today's erupted. Yusaku was curious to see how she would act to cut losses, or perhaps even turn a profit. After waiting for her conversation with the staff to end, he stepped forward and introduced himself. Miss Ningguang, hello, I'm Yusaku Kudo. He offered a polite nod and smile. We've been in the same room before, but this must be our first proper introduction. Ningguang inclined her head and smiled back. Mr. Kudo, I've long admired your work. Your mystery novels are wonderful. Several of my friends are big fans, especially of the Night Baron series. If it's convenient, could I trouble you for a few autographs later? Of course, my pleasure. I didn't realize you counted any of my readers among your circle. Yusaku answered readily. Then, glancing at the scene of the press conference, his expression shifted to concern. I've long heard of your reputation in business, Miss Ningguang. When I learned you'd invested in the Cocoon project, I'd hoped for a chance to meet you, only to have our first proper meeting be at a crime scene. Most unfortunate. Ningguang's smile didn't falter. Thank you, Mr. Kudo, but you needn't worry too much. She hesitated for a beat, then continued. The moment I saw what happened to Kenmura and called the police, I also contacted my assistant and told her to get in touch with the other Sindora directors about buying their shares. Before long, I expect good news. Yusaku raised an eyebrow. Oh, so the moment you arrived, you already suspected Sindora himself was responsible? Why then, didn't you tell the police when they came? As if the question had not carried any tension, Ningguang smiled serenely. Yes, didn't I mention earlier? Mr. Kenmura adored Nahida. He was careless with his words in her presence, and sometimes let slip things he wouldn't tell anyone else. When Nahida saw what had happened, she surmised that Sindora was the culprit. At that, Yusaku frowned. He suddenly realized what had felt off. The little girl who had been beside Ningguang, Nahida, was nowhere to be seen. Ningguang continued, unfazed. As for your second question, Mr. Kudo, I am a merchant. A merchant's purpose is profit. Solving crimes is the job of the police or of detectives. In business, timing and information are everything. Once I realized the chairman of the Sindora Group was likely compromised, my first priority was to seize the opportunity, quickly and before anyone else knew, and take control of the Sindora Group for myself. But at that point, the Sindora Group's troubles hadn't surfaced publicly. The company looked healthy. Why would the directors agree to sell their shares to you? Yusaku asked. Ningguang smiled, walked to the window, and stared out for a moment before turning back. That is my method. Yusaku studied her silhouette against the backlight, trying to read her expression. He heard footsteps approaching and saw Ningguang look up, a satisfied smile spreading across her face as if she had just received excellent news. Curious, he turned to see who was arriving. A young woman approached with efficient grace, long blue hair tied in a high ponytail, wearing a white qipao trimmed with gold and matching white sleeves. A Chinese knot at her waist held a blue bead framed in exactly the same style as Ningguang's. She carried a neat stack of documents, clearly there to report. Yusaku's eyes lingered for a moment on the matching knot, then he looked away politely. As she passed, he gave a slight nod. She went straight to Ningguang. "Miss Ningguang, everything you requested is complete," she reported. "Miss Kiching says she's spoken with every Sindora director in M country. They've all agreed to transfer their shares at market price. Here are the documents for you to review." Ningguang flipped through the papers, visibly pleased, though not surprised, as if she had expected nothing less. She made the brief introductions, and only then did Yusaku realize this was the assistant she'd mentioned. 137. Preparations for Ningguang. Yusaku Kudo inclined his head politely to Ganyu. "Miss Ganyu, hello. I didn't expect the capable assistant Miss Ningguang praised to be so young. To have Miss Ningguang speak so highly of you, you must be exceptionally talented." Flustered, Ganyu waved her hands. No, Mr. Kudo. I'm not as capable as you make me sound. I'm only carrying out the tasks Miss Ningguang assigns me. The truly remarkable ones are Miss Ningguang and the others. Without them, there would be no Jade Chamber today." The last thought about present-day Liyue she left unsaid in front of Yusaku, though she believed it wholeheartedly. Yusaku chuckled. "It sounds like you admire Miss Ningguang a great deal." He turned his attention back to Ningguang. "In fact, after what happened, I can't help but admire her decisiveness. The moment the incident occurred, she moved against the Sindora Group without hesitation. If I'm not mistaken, all of Sindora's R&D now belongs to Miss Ningguang. But with respect, I wonder about the AI, Noah's Ark. When Noah's Ark went rogue, why didn't you halt the operation?" Ningguang replied calmly, "Because I judged something else to be even more valuable." "Oh, is that so? Then allow me to wish your plan every success." Yusaku's curiosity about what Sindora could have that outshone an AI burned at the back of his mind, but he kept it to himself. Business intelligence was delicate. Ningguang accepted his good wishes with a smile. Noticing staff calling her in the distance, she turned to Yusaku. "Mr. Kudo, I have another matter to attend to. Please excuse me." "Of course, Miss Ningguang. Go ahead." With that, Ningguang left with Ganyu. As they walked off toward the waiting staff, Yusaku glanced to where something was hidden beneath a tablecloth. After a moment of silence, he sighed and named the eavesdropper. "Shinichi, I know it's you." Conan Edogawa emerged reluctantly from his hiding spot beside the table, scratching his head. "Dad, when did you know I was here?" Yusaku ruffled Conan's hair. "When Miss Ganyu approached, the tablecloth moved. I knew someone was there. If it had been an adult, people would have noticed. It had to be a child. And the only child here, nosy enough to eavesdrop, is you." Conan ducked away. He inwardly wondered why his father was suddenly ruffling his hair like his mother used to. He never did that before. Straightening his rumpled hair, Conan chuckled. "I was just curious what you'd be talking about at a time like this." Yusaku raised an eyebrow. "So, Shinichi, any thoughts after what you heard?" Conan stopped fussing and thought for a moment, frowning. "Something feels off, but I can't put my finger on it." Miss Ningguang acted very quickly, but given her talents, that might be normal, right? From his father's briefing, Conan had to admit Ningguang's business acumen was formidable. Yusaku prompted, "Here's the thing. No matter how capable she is, without prior preparation, she couldn't have seized control of the Sindora Group within hours of the crime, especially with the board across the states and her here in Japan. Having Miss Kiking take the lead would help, but without groundwork, it still seems impossible. Conan's eyes widened. You mean, Miss Ningguang likely knew beforehand that Sindora would implode? It wasn't impossible. Given Kenmura's connection with Nahida and the suspicious circumstances around Hiroki's death, Ningguang could have inferred that Sindora would make a desperate move against Kenmura. If she expected it, she might have prepared the takeover. What Conan couldn't reconcile was this. If Ningguang foresaw Sindora's attack, why didn't she stop it? Had she allowed the attack to secure the takeover? That was a human life at stake. Kenmura had been lucky to survive. If the blow had struck a vital point, he could have died instantly. Was that why Ningguang had been on the scene so quickly? And did Nahida, who had appeared at the same time, know what Ningguang had done? That's my suspicion, Yusaku said with a sigh as he watched Shinichi's disbelief. Despite the boy's unease about Ningguang's oddness, he had let his guard down. He'd even been impressed by her. It was understandable. Ningguang had genuine charisma, read people well, and spoke persuasively. After talking with her, it was hard not to be impressed. Even knowing she might have let Kenmura be endangered, Yusaku found it difficult to feel outright hostility. One thing I'm uncertain about, he continued, is whether the AI's rampage was part of her plan. If it had been, she should have halted Noah's Ark before it self-destructed. An artificial intelligence was a revolutionary asset, invaluable to any entrepreneur. When the AI apparently self-destructed, the police inspected the servers beneath the venue and confirmed total destruction. They owed thanks to Nahida, truly the god of grass, who had used the Gnosis to shift Noah's Ark's code unnoticed into the Akasha terminal and smuggle it out, leaving everyone convinced the AI was gone for good. Yusaku folded his arms. If the rampage wasn't predicted, why didn't Miss Ningguang seem alarmed? Could Sindora really have possessed something more valuable than an AI? Conan mulled over his father's question. As Yusaku had pointed out, Ningguang's actions were contradictory. The boy couldn't reconcile them either. 138. Free of charge. Forget it. I'll think about those things later. Yusaku Kudo dropped the subject first. He turned to Conan. That Miss Ganyu just now, like Ningguang, seems to be from that mysterious organization you mentioned, the one everyone's unsure even exists. I noticed they had similar beads. I suspect Miss Kiking in the US might be connected too. Yusaku couldn't help but add, that organization really seems full of talented people. Conan was silent. He reviewed in his head the people he'd seen who wore similar accessories. They spanned many backgrounds, and almost every one of them was unusually capable and striking. His father had a point. Conan still couldn't fully understand how people scattered across the world, wearing different faces and holding different positions, could be connected. Shinichi, Yusaku continued, be more careful when you run into people like that. You say some of them are kind and live ordinary lives, but you can't deny that others might be involved with the Black organization. The exact relationship between them is unclear. In short, be cautious and don't let anyone suspect who you really are. His tone held genuine worry. Yusaku had already been concerned when his son had provoked the Black organization, an international criminal syndicate. Now there was another mysterious group, one he hadn't even heard of until recently, hovering around Shinichi. From the few names Conan had mentioned, Yusaku could sense the other's influence wasn't small. He could only hope this group had no ties to the Black organization. Otherwise, Shinichi's situation would be far more dangerous. Conan nodded and said, though whether he could follow his father's advice when it really mattered was another story. Yusaku checked his watch. It was getting late, and he didn't press further. After a final warning to be extra careful, he was about to leave. At that moment, Ningguang's voice came over the speakers at the press conference. Conan looked up to see her standing at the center of the stage, composed, holding a microphone and addressing the crowd in a calm, steady tone. Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to apologize for tonight's accident, she began. After a brief apology to the political and business figures present, Ningguang announced that she was taking over the Sindora group. The audience buzzed, but she continued as if she hadn't noticed the murmurs. At the same time, she went on, to thank the police for finding the culprit who injured Kenmura so quickly, and for the long-term efforts they make to protect Baika and Japan. I have decided to donate the Sindora Group's DNA tracking program to the Japanese police free of charge. I hope it will help in tracking down killers and solving cases. Thank you." She bowed slightly. Inspector Magure and the other officers in attendance erupted into applause. They had seen how useful the DNA tracking program could be, especially for locating people. The program's creator, Hiroki, had been a genius. Learning afterward that he had been driven to his death by Sindora had filled Magure and his colleagues with regret. They had long wished to acquire the technology, but had assumed it would be impossible, so Ningguang's offer filled them with genuine joy. Ningguang's decision instantly won her favor among the police. In future, unless doing so crossed a line, these officers would be inclined to assist her. The other political and business figures, seeing the police reaction, reluctantly joined the applause. They admired how quickly Ningguang had reacted to the crisis and how decisively she had consolidated control of the Sindora Group. Some had hoped to get a piece of the spoils, but were a step too late. Now, with good relations with the police, her operations in Japan would face far fewer obstacles, provided no one intentionally provoked her. Giving away something as valuable as the DNA tracking program so readily demonstrated real business acumen. Whispers about approaching the Suzuki Group to gather more intelligence and decide whether to ally with her drifted through the crowd. Haibara was in the audience as well, clapping along at a distance with a few children. When Conan returned from where he'd stepped away a moment before, she called to him, "You're back, great detective. So what did you overhear?" Haibara had seen Conan leave and guessed what he'd been up to. Conan gave her a helpless look. "How did you know I went to eavesdrop?" She rolled her eyes. "Isn't that what you're best at, or are you saying you weren't eavesdropping?" Conan hesitated, then tried to defend himself. "I just happened to run into Miss Ningguang talking to my father. It felt rude to interrupt, so I waited off to the side." He added more candidly, "Besides, reasoning is my thing. Eavesdropping isn't." Haibara smirked, but listened as Conan briefly recounted what had happened. "Miss Ningguang is certainly a capable businesswoman," he concluded. Haibara sighed in admiration. Conan found her reaction a little surprising and asked, "You don't find her methods objectionable?" She glanced at him. "Objectionable isn't the right word. The fact she was first on the scene and helped save Kemura shows she doesn't disregard human life, and his life was saved because of her. Isn't that enough?" 139. Interview. Haibara sighed and turned to Conan. "Kudo, you can't expect everyone to be as indifferent as you are. People are selfish. Miss Ningguang didn't deliberately hurt anyone. For a businesswoman, that's already admirable. She pursued her goals and still tried to save others, and in the end no one was harmed. That's enough." Conan's expression was conflicted. He hadn't expected Haibara to say that. "Maybe you're right," he said slowly, "but I still believe nothing is more important than human life." Muri Detective Agency. Nearly a week had passed since the launch of the Cocoon game, but the fallout continued. Newspapers were full of debates over AI and reports on Ningguang's moves since taking control of the Sindora Group. Reporters from every TV station were itching for interviews and scoops. In the agency, the television was about to air yesterday's Yomiuri television interview with Ningguang. Kogoro Mori sat behind his desk with his feet propped on it. He dropped the newspaper he'd been reading and, glancing at Conan, curled his lip. Honestly, what kid enjoys business news? If there wasn't a Miss Yoko program today, I'd never let some brat hog the TV for this. If Conan wants to watch, let him. It's better than some pervert using the TV to stare at pretty women. Rand said as she approached, setting down a fresh pot of tea with enough force that some splashed onto the desk. "And Dad, take your feet off the table. Conan's still a child. At least act like it. Don't set a bad example." Conan thought, "Isn't that a little late?" Between his dad's drinking and smoking, what expectation was there to begin with? Realizing Rand was scolding him, Kogoro hastily put his feet down, wiped the table, shoved his chair in, picked up the paper again, and pretended to read it intently. "This kid's learned too many things he shouldn't from TV. That's why he's so disobedient," he muttered. Conan pursed his lips. It wasn't the television that had taught him most of what he knew. Those lessons came from the places his father had dragged him to in Hawaii. Just then, the interview began. Mizunashi Reina, the recently popular anchor, and Ningguang appeared on the screen. Before Conan could get a clear look, Kogoro shoved him aside on the couch and planted himself in the prime spot. Conan blinked in surprise. Uncle had just said he wasn't interested, so why was he now glued to the TV? Had he sensed something suspicious about Miss Ningguang after the last case and decided to learn more? Had he suddenly gotten smarter? Who knew Yomiuri's host was so pretty and interviewing Miss Ningguang too? Lucky day, feast for the eyes, haha, Kogoro chuckled, eyes half closed, oblivious to Rand's glare for pushing Conan aside. Conan's mouth twitched. As usual, Uncle Mori's only concern was pretty women. He'd been overthinking it all along. At Ningguang's residence, Ningguang was watching the same interview on Yomiuri television. She had been surprised when she learned that Mizunashi Reina would be the interviewer, but once the crew arrived, she cooperated and completed the interview. She still didn't know whether the visit had been an ordinary Yomiuri booking or something arranged by the Black Organization. Rewind to the previous day at Yomiuri television. Mizunashi Reina remembered an email that had come a few days earlier. Secure an interview with the new head of the Sindora group and probe whether the AI Noah's Ark had truly self-destructed. Miss Mizunashi, it's almost time. We need to head to Miss Ningguang's offices for the interview, a staffer reminded. Right, I'm coming, Rena said, setting aside the thought that had been nagging her, packing up and joining the team. At Ningguang's offices, they were met by her assistant, Miss Ganyu. After introductions, Ganyu led the Yomiuri team to a conference room to wait. Sorry, Miss Ningguang has had a lot of interviews. She's currently speaking with Charlotte from the Baker Daily. It should finish soon. Please wait here, and I'll let you know when she's ready, Ganyu said apologetically. That's fine. The trip was tiring. A rest would be good, Rena replied. Ganyu brought water and left the room. Once the outsiders were alone, Rena's colleagues relaxed and chatted, but she stayed quiet, mentally rehearsing her questions. She did, however, overhear their discussion about the reporter Charlotte, who was currently interviewing Ningguang. Apparently, Charlotte had recently made a name for himself, exposing truths some people wanted buried and had received threatening letters. The team wondered whether the situation had been resolved. Seeing him still out and about, they assumed the matter was mostly settled. In reality, things were different. Charlotte had indeed received threats, but the danger was far from over. He ignored the warnings and kept walking the streets of Baker, tirelessly hunting for the truth. Only when the editor-in-chief grew worried about Charlotte's safety did he reassign him to the celebrity interview section. At least those assignments carried less risk. That was why Charlotte was now at Ningguang's company. 140, Void Terminal. While her colleagues gossiped, Mizunashi Reina sifted through the information in front of her. When she was done, she lifted her head and looked around with open curiosity. The conference room was unremarkable, like any corporate meeting room, except for a large display board standing in the center, its surface scarred with the ghosts of pasted-up papers. It looked as if someone had once pinned sheets there while the rest of the room analyzed the intel, debated, and decided. They didn't wait long before the door opened again. Ganyu came in and led them to Miss Ningguang for the interview. On the way, they passed a Baker Daily reporter who had just finished his own questions. The two groups exchanged polite nods and went their separate ways. Reina's eyes drifted across the corridor and stopped on a girl who stood out. She wore a distinctive European-style red dress and a rare monocle over her left eye, idly toying with a camera and checking its contents from time to time. No one introduced her, but Reina immediately recognized her as Charlotte, the girl their colleagues had mentioned earlier. They brushed past, and Reina thought no more of it. After introductions, Reina followed protocol and asked Ningguang the usual questions. Seeing the interview proceed smoothly, she casually steered the topic toward the AI Noah's Ark. Miss Ningguang, I heard that during the Cocoon game launch, Noah's Ark suddenly ran wild and self-destructed. Is that true? Ningguang considered the question, then answered, Yes, I regret it deeply. Losing Noah's Ark was a huge blow to the tech world. When it initiated self-destruction, our engineers tried to stop it, but it was absolutely determined. Within minutes, its code had been wiped. Recovery was virtually impossible. She glanced at Rena and noticed her leaning forward, clearly intrigued. So their real interest was Noah's Ark. No, the organization's interest in AI. Ningguang hoped the news of its death wouldn't disappoint them too much. Feigning curiosity, Rena pushed on. Since Noah's Ark can't be restored, what made you decide to acquire Sindora Group? Without the AI, the Cocoon project can't continue. True, without Noah's Ark, the holographic game can't be revived, at least not publicly. Privately, though, we can have Noah's Ark and Nahida rebuild the scenario for staff to use now and then, Ningguang added. Rena felt a quiet relief. If Ningguang spoke that way, Noah's Ark must indeed be gone. A businesswoman wouldn't write off such an investment unless the AI was truly lost. Better that it self-destructed. If the organization had wanted it, they would have stopped at nothing, and that would have been disastrous. But Ningguang showed no regret, which suggested another plan was already afoot. As if confirming Reina's thought, Ningguang continued, Sindora Group once created Noah's Ark. Even if we can't replicate it right away, they remain world leaders in AI. That's why I acquired them. Oh, Reina's curiosity sharpened. Does that mean a new project is already in motion? Ningguang folded her hands in her lap, smiled at the camera, and nodded. Yes, we've actually made some progress. Could you tell us about it? Reina pressed. Noah's Ark had barely vanished, and Sindora already had results. How far had they come? And was it still gaming? Questions burned behind her polite tone. Of course, Ningguang said without hesitation. Our focus now is on everyday life. Using Sindora's massive computing power, we're building a portable device that integrates information collection, transmission, and communication. People will be able to study, converse, and access services through it. Essentially a pocket computer, but far more powerful. For now, we call it the Void Terminal. Rana blinked. Could current technology really produce such a thing? Then again, holographic games and self-aware AI already existed, so perhaps it wasn't so far-fetched. Ningguang relaxed and looked at her, inviting further questions. Rena gathered herself. Hearing that, I'm intrigued. How far along is the research? Any problems? I hope everything goes smoothly so we can get our hands on the Void Terminal soon.